Everyone repeats the same story. And the story survives because it is true enough to pass. Pink Floyd lost Syd Barrett to acid, to fame, to whatever fragile wiring he had been born with. The brilliant founder who burned too bright and then went dark. A rock and roll casualty with a beautiful, sorrowful soundtrack. You have heard this version 100 times. It is the version that fits on a plaque. Tonight, I want to tell you the one that is almost never said aloud, because it is colder than the first, and because once you have heard it, you will not be able to stop hearing it underneath every record this band ever made. Here it is, with no cushion. Pink Floyd did not lose Syd Barrett a single time in a single year. They kept losing him, deliberately, and they turned the act of losing him into the most haunting catalog in the history of rock. Begin with the moment that is too ordinary to feel like what it was. One morning early in 1968, the band is driving to a show. Someone in the car asks whether they should go and pick up Syd. Someone else says it is not worth the trouble. And that is the entire execution. No vote, no confrontation, no farewell. A founder erased by a shrug. A man left standing on a curb in the middle of his own life. They had already brought in David Gilmour, supposedly just to cover for Syd on the night Syd could no longer function. And on that gray morning, the temporary quietly became the permanent. The man who had named the band, who had written almost everything they had recorded, who in the only sense that mattered simply was Pink Floyd, was not collected. He was left where he stood. Now I have to be fair to them, because the fairness is what makes the story unbearable rather than merely cruel. They were probably right to do it. He could no longer perform. He would detune his guitar in front of an audience and stand motionless, or strike a single chord and let it ring for an hour, while the others tried to build a song around the silence. Keeping him would have ended the band. Leaving him behind was survival. But survival and innocence are not the same thing. And Pink Floyd seems to have understood that distinction more deeply than anyone, because they spent the next 40 years composing the difference between the two. This is the part that sounds like mysticism and is in fact pure structure, the melancholy that became their signature, that famous atmosphere, the slow ache, the enormous empty spaces inside the sound, the sense that something vast is missing from the center of the music, even when every track is full. None of that is a mood they selected from a menu. It is the negative space left by a removed body. Listen to what the mature sound actually is. It is space organized around an absence. Richard Wright's chords hang in the air and refuse to resolve, hovering, waiting for someone who is not coming. Gilmour's guitar sings those long, grieving lines into rooms that feel just slightly too large and too quiet. The architecture of the classic Pink Floyd sound is the architecture of a house where someone used to live. They did not write sad songs about Syd. They built a sad house in the shape of his disappearance. And then they moved in, and they stayed for 4 decades. And here is the deepest idea, the one I want you to carry out of this with you. In the very early days, before the famous lineup hardened into its 4 roles, Syd Barrett was not one function among 4. He was all of them at once, alive inside a single nervous system. He wrote the words. He sang them. He played the guitar. He conceived the entire strange and whimsical vision. The lyric and the voice and the instrument and the concept were not collaborators. They were one person. He was the body and the mind and the color and the pulse, undivided. And that, precisely that, is what could not last. because no single nervous system can hold all four of those at full intensity for long without tearing apart at the seam. So when Syd collapsed, the band did not simply hire a replacement frontman. They did something far stranger and far more revealing about what they had lost. They took the impossible hole that he had been, and they divided it into 4 men, each of whom could survive carrying only a quarter of it. Gilmour took the body, the voice, the guitar, the sheer physical pleasure of pure sound. Waters took the mind, the concept, the words, the refusal to ever let a record be merely beautiful. Wright took the harmony and the atmosphere, the color that belonged to neither body nor mind. Mason took the pulse, the patient and unshowy floor beneath everyone else's feet. 4 functions held in tension, and the chemistry between them produced every great record they ever made. But understand what that chemistry actually was. It was an amputation. The band you love was born by cutting one genius into 4 survivable pieces. They are not the group that replaced Syd Barrett. They are what was left of him, distributed across 4 men, each able to carry only 1/4 of the fire that had burned him alive. I have always suspected that something about his fall was deeper and darker than chemistry alone, given the almost instantaneous way he created, the way the music seemed to arrive through him rather than from him. And the most useful frame I have ever found for it does not come from rock history at all. It comes from a young philosopher born in Prussia in 1844. A man who, like Barrett, lost his father early, whose brilliant, productive years were astonishingly brief, and who finally fell in 1889 into a silence from which he would never return. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and his first book describes what happened to Syd Barrett with a precision that should not be possible across a century. That book argues that all artistic beauty is born from the tension between 2 forces. One he names after Apollo, the god of structure, of form, of the protective illusions we build so that we can live, of language itself, which lets us draw a clean line around the world and pretend the line is real. The other he names after Dionysus, the god of intoxication, of the dissolving of boundaries, of the ecstatic destruction of the self, the force that pulls the individual back down into the undifferentiated ocean of life. Great art, Nietzsche says, requires both held in balance. And the artist who surrenders entirely to the Dionysian, who lifts the protective veil all the way and looks directly at what is behind it, may not be able to lower the veil again. That is Barrett. From his very first single, he announced that he meant to lift the veil and show reality without its comforting disguises. His songs filtered everything through a subconscious that produced a voice and a sound and a logic that were his alone. But somewhere in that process, he stopped describing the dissolution and began to undergo it. In his most extreme instrumental passages, he abandoned language entirely, surrendering to a flow of sound accountable to neither syntax nor grammar, only to the pure Dionysian impulse. He consulted an ancient oracle of change and wrote a song from its answer. He embraced the dissolving so fiercely that he could not find his way back to any livable equilibrium. The single track he managed to give the band's second album is the sound of a personality questioning, from the inside, whether it is still there at all. He was not present in more ways than one. After he was gone, the former architecture students who had watched him disappear into that intoxication understood that they could not reproduce it. They could not will themselves into the Dionysian. It had nearly killed the one man who had truly entered it. So they chose the opposite. The anarchic spontaneity of the Barrett era gave way, almost overnight, to meticulous construction, to records and concerts engineered down to the second, to an art in which chance was allowed almost no role at all. This was the precise moment the Apollonian triumphed over the Dionysian in Pink Floyd. And it triumphed not as a victory, but as a condition of survival. They built the cathedral because they had seen what happened to the man who walked into the fire without one. Which brings us to the most famous ghost story in the history of recorded music. And I want to tell it slowly, because it is too perfect to have been invented. And it was not invented. In June of 1975, the band is back at Abbey Road, deep in the recording of an album built around Syd, working on the very piece that mourns him, the long, shining elegy that everyone now knows. A heavy, bald man wanders into the control room. No hair, no eyebrows, carrying a weight he had never carried before. He stands there, and for a while nobody in the room recognizes him. These are the people who loved him, who started a band with him, who left him on a curb 7 years earlier, and they cannot place his face. Then someone realizes. It is Syd. By a coincidence so cruel it borders on the supernatural. He has appeared on the exact day they are recording the song about his absence. He asks, vaguely, when his guitar part will be needed. And then he drifts back out. Most of them never see him again. Sit with what that scene actually is. They were not mourning a dead man. They were performing his death while he was alive enough to walk into the room and watch them do it. They had already turned him into a song, into a beautiful and marketable and immortal absence. And the absence walked in wearing a body, and it frightened them. Because the living Syd was an interruption to the perfect Syd-shaped hole they had built an entire career inside. And here is the inversion I promised you. The thing that turns the whole sad story inside out. We are told that the tragedy of Syd Barrett is that he went mad. I want to suggest the tragedy is that he was right. He looked at the same machine the others looked at, the touring, the industry, the demand to become a reliable product, the obligation to stay sane and pleasant and available so that the show could go on forever. And something in him refused. Call it chemistry, call it illness, call it a fragility he was born with. Underneath all of it, there is a refusal. A man who could not or would not keep performing once he had seen, with mortal eyes, what performing actually costs. The other four kept performing. They grew rich and famous, selling stadiums full of people songs about alienation, about lunacy, about the man at the edge, about the dark side of the moon. While the dark side of the moon sat in a flat in Cambridge painting pictures he would finish and then destroy. To their genuine and lasting credit, they made certain the royalties reached him until the day he died. But the arithmetic underneath is merciless. They sold the view of the abyss. He paid for the fall. Every record about madness was funded at the deepest level by a real madness they had escaped and he had not. And the closer they came to greatness, the more clearly that greatness was lit by his ruin. So let me leave you where the music itself leaves me. Listen again to those 4 slow notes that open the elegy, the phrase everyone calls the saddest in all of rock. We hear it as a band grieving a fallen friend. But an elegy is something you sing about the dead, and Syd was not dead. He would outlive that recording by more than 30 years. So, it is not an elegy at all. It is a confession, sung to a living man, by 4 people who had built their entire sound out of the space where he used to stand, who could not recognize his face when it appeared in the doorway, and who would spend the rest of their lives unable to stop describing the hole he left, because the hole was the band. where art does not console. It autopsies. And what the autopsy reveals here is not a man who broke, but a man who saw, and 4 others who chose the structure that would let them keep looking away.